Hey, hello everybody. Thank you for joining. We're gonna give it about 2 more minutes just to wait for everyone to join today, and then we'll get started. So we'll start around 1:03 Eastern. Thank you. All right, for those of you rolling in, it just announced we'll give it about 1 more minute to give everyone a second to log on, get into their Zooms, and then we will get started. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to TuMeke's Office Ergonomics presentation. Just some housekeeping. I will be answering questions as they come in. I have my colleague Rachel on the call. She will be moderating any questions. So if you answer them in Q&A, we'll make sure to get them answered. So I'm actually going to get started. This training will be recorded. So if you signed up and attended this presentation, the recording will be emailed to you. So don't fret and feel like you have to write everything down, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Amaanat Gill, and I am a board certified ergonomist and a solutions manager at TuMeke. So my background is in ergonomics. I studied ergonomics. I worked as a consultant and helped manage an in-house program. And I bring all of that experience to TuMeke to kind of serve as a subject matter expert and product expert. So my goal is just to make sure our customers and our prospects have a resource and they can kind of maximize on all of the capabilities of our platform. And just to provide a little bit of background on what TuMeke does, if you aren't familiar with us, or if this is really the first time that you're kind of sitting through any of our presentations, TuMeke is an ergonomics AI computer vision company that uses AI to help kind of streamline and make the ergonomic assessment process easier. So you're probably familiar with, the fact that there aren't a lot of people that have this expertise, and we want to just make ergonomics more accessible for folks. So today we will be focusing on office ergonomics, and I will cover a few different things. The first thing, it's always, good to kind of step back, take 1,000-foot view. Why ergonomics matters, why is it important? Then we'll focus on some common challenges in office ergonomics, some guidelines and recommendations to help you set up your workstation properly. And then lastly, we will do a quick demo of the TuMeke software. So why ergonomics matters? To kind of give you some context and backgrounds, the word ergonomics comes from two Greek words, ergon meaning to work, and nomos, laws or convention. So literally, it just means the laws of work. And if you look up the definition of ergonomics, you're going to see a lot of different definitions from a lot of different organizations and societies, and they might seem more complicated than just laws of work. But all you really need to know is the practice of ergonomics is to fit the system to the workers and their capabilities, or more simply, fit the task to the worker so that we can optimize health, safety, performance, and productivity. So why is ergonomics important? Outside of just kind of keeping in mind employer health and well-being, there are a lot of stats that kind of speak to the importance of having an ergonomics program or addressing ergonomics issues within your organization. So ergonomics injuries or musculoskeletal disorders, or even work-related musculoskeletal disorders, they all kind of mean the same thing, but they are a major share of the injury burden in not just the US, but worldwide. So according to the World Health Organization's, musculoskeletal disorders are the leading cause of disability globally. In the US, they account for about 1/3 of all workers' comp costs. And they cost US businesses an upward of $17 billion a year. And outside of just the injury scope, right? I think a lot of times when you're thinking about material handling environments, we automatically jump to injuries because they are prevalent. With office environments, you might not see as many injuries, but you do see reports of discomfort. And you also see that because of that discomfort, employees are less productive. So workers with reported musculoskeletal disorders, so that could be an injury or discomfort, tend to be about 60% less productive. And why does that, why am I talking about this? So we know ergonomic issues are costly to people, to organizations, but ergonomic interventions, if they're done correctly, have been shown to kind of improve this injury burden. So with office ergonomic interventions specifically, a lot of organizations have seen around 60% reduction in musculoskeletal disorders, an 88% decrease in absenteeism, which is time away from work, 15 to 25% increase in productivity, and also around a 50% reduction in employee turnover and improved employee satisfaction. So a lot of these stats are just coming from research that's been compiled over the years. So, the impact that it'll have on your organization might differ slightly, but it'll just depend on, factors at your workplace and also your techniques and methods that you're kind of employing for your ergonomics interventions. So now moving on to different challenges within office ergonomics. So again, the focus of this presentation is really on office ergo. There are, of course, similar or maybe even different challenges in material handling environments, but these are just common things that we see in office settings. And a lot of it has to do with the way that we work and how it's been changing significantly over the last 10 to 15 years. Some common issues with the way that we work or the way that offices are set up is that we tend to have one size fits all design, which doesn't fit a diverse workforce. So when you're designing for that working population, let's say you're building out a new office, we tend to recommend that you want to design from the fifth, design including or considering the 5th percentile female all the way up to the 95th percentile male. So if we're talking about height, that's about that's a 5-foot female to a 6'2" male. And just one example of how different we all are is the seated elbow height. So basically that means the recommended typing height for the 5th percentile female is about 10 inches lower than the recommended typing height for the 95th percentile male. So if we have to accommodate, if we have people that kind of range from shapes and sizes from the 5th to the 95th percentile, we also need to make sure to design for that working population. And unfortunately, just given a lot of factors, that's not always the case. Another thing that has been increasingly been an issue, and this we saw really skyrocket after the COVID-19 pandemic, is the hybrid working environment, right? We tend to work from many different places now. You might be fully remote, you might be fully in office, you might be somewhere in between, you might be traveling a lot, but what all that results in is just an inconsistent working environment, and you might not have the tools or the space to make sure that you are set up properly. Another trend that we've seen kind of come into fruition over, I would say, the last 10 years is like hot desking, or really what that means is unassigned seating. So you might have an office dedicated to your workforce, but maybe that workforce is hybrid and you don't necessarily need a single desk for every single one of your employees, every single day. While the intention was that, kind of to make more efficient use of the space, what tends to happen is that it's really hard to kind of control or know how many people are going to be coming in on a given workday. So, not a lot of people end up having to use like non-workspaces, like lounge areas and things like that for work, to work at. And on top of that, you really have limited ability to personalize the workstation. So if, you're coming into that flex working environment and all you have there is maybe a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse at a fixed height desk, and 10 different people are going to use that same desk over the next month, the ability for those 10 different people to kind of personalize that workstation and make sure that it fits their body while they're working is really going to be dependent on how much adjustability you can provide them, and also how much education you provide them so that they know that they can make these changes and what changes to make. And then the last thing is, I'm sure we all kind of experience this, but the amount of time we spend in virtual meetings has significantly increased across our working population, especially if you're working remote or you're hybrid, or, you work with people in different parts of the world. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I walk away at the end of the day, just kind of back to back meetings, and I don't really have a chance to leave my chair. So while that ability to do virtual meetings and, quite frankly, events like this, there's a lot of positives to it, but the downside that we see from an ergonomics perspective is that we just sit more and we don't move as much. And so over time, that can lead to some discomfort and challenges as well. And then in terms of actual issues that we see with design across office environments is, if we have limited adjustability, or maybe you're working from home and you don't have the kind of resources, or you just haven't had the time to invest in a chair, for example, with that limited adjustability, we are not able to always achieve a good fit between the person and the work tools that they're using. Sometimes setups become more and more complex given the type of environment that you work in. So maybe you work in, a bank in a trading environment and you have multiple screens and you also need a webcam on top of that. Or maybe you're working from home and you have a monitor and your laptop is your webcam. With those increased diversification in the different types of technology setups, we're seeing setups that are, increasingly difficult to align and fit to the person. Oftentimes, you can have a lot of adjustability, with your chair, your desk, but sometimes those features are underused. Maybe the user doesn't know that they exist, or maybe the user just doesn't know what to do with them. And then lastly, a lot of times ergonomics is kind of missing in that design phase, right? So let's say you're trying to kind of standardize on some new equipment for the new office build out. If you don't think about ergonomics in that design stage, it can often lead to some issues down the road. Okay, so now moving on to the different things that are associated with ergonomics injuries. I'm sure you guys have seen this list of risk factors before, but when you're thinking about ergonomics entirely, right, doesn't matter which environment you're working in, these are primarily the different risk factors that are associated with the most injuries that we see. In office, the 3 risk factors that we tend to see the most of are going to be related to posture, duration, and repetition. So the posture you're working in, how long that posture is sustained for, and and the repetitive movements that you're engaging in. And primarily, it's going to be associated with those sustained, prolonged postures. So postures. I will kind of throughout the presentation be referring to awkward and neutral postures. Awkward postures are postures that require an excessive amount of force to maintain. And because of that, we don't want to be sitting or standing in them for prolonged periods. In an office environment, some common awkward postures are going to be that leaning forward position. And that leaning forward actually is probably one of the number one contributors to that lower back discomfort you might feel in an office setting. So for every inch that you kind of lean forward, you add almost 10 pounds of weight to that lower back. Another common risk factor or posture that we see is shoulder shrugging. So kind of lifting your shoulders up towards your ears like this. And this tends to happen primarily because the work surfaces we work on are too high for us. So going back to that, you know, the stat I said about the seated elbow height between a 5th percentile female and a 95th percentile male, that recommended elbow height, seated elbow height differs by about 10 inches. So if you don't have that adjustable work surface, oftentimes you can find yourself at a work surface that's too high. In fact, you know, the typical non-adjustable desk that you would buy, that you would see in an office setting, or maybe even, you know, buy for home, tends to be around the 29.5 to 30-inch mark. And in order for someone to be able to sit at a desk that high and be able to keep their shoulders down in a neutral position, you have to be about 6'4". So for most people, that fixed height workstation is too high. We often see contact stress as well, which is anytime you know, your soft tissue comes in contact with the hard surface. So think your wrists, underneath your thighs, behind your knees. And then lastly, another common risk factor is kind of, it's called neck flexion, or bending your neck up, down, or neck extension, bending your neck up. Both of those things can put a lot of strain on the muscles in your neck and also your cervical spine, which is up in your neck. Neutral postures are what we want to achieve, and these are postures that require a minimal amount of force to maintain. So when you're thinking about office, this is what that neutral position really looks like. You want to make sure your feet are flat on the floor, your thighs are roughly parallel to the ground, you don't have any contact stress behind the knee or at the wrist, or even at your elbow. You want to make sure that your shoulders are relaxed and you are sitting all the way back and offloading your body weight into the backrest of your chair. And lastly, you want to make sure your neck is straight. Okay, so, you know, it's always easy to tell someone that this is how they need to sit, but I want to make sure that you kind of walk away with some tips and tricks on how to achieve these postures. So what we're going to do next is go over the entire workstation, if you're sitting or standing, review the chair, the keyboard and the mouse, the monitor, and then lastly, standing and movement breaks. So one thing to note is I am on purpose going through the workstation in a certain order, and this is the order that you should make adjustments to your workstation or anyone else's workstation in. You'll notice we're starting from the ground and working our way up. So we're going to start with the chair first, and this is the exact order that I would recommend making changes to the chair in. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that your chair height is adjusted so that your thighs are parallel to the ground and your feet are either flat on the floor or they're being supported by a footrest. I know if you do this right now, like if you're following along and making adjustments, you might think that, well, if I lower my chair to this height, now the desk is going to be too high. Don't worry, we'll get there. But for now, just pretend like you don't have a desk in front of you and you're just sitting in a chair, and adjust that height so that your thighs are parallel to the ground or feet are flat on the floor. The next thing here would be the seat depth. You want to make sure that this part of the chair here, which is called the seat pan, is long enough so that you feel like your body weight is being evenly distributed across the seat, but it's not so long that it hits you behind the knee and it either kind of causes that contact stress behind the knee or it causes you to lean forward. So think about lounge chairs or couches that are really deep. If they're too deep, it becomes too hard to sit all the way back, and then we end up kind of engaging in that leaning forward position. So just kind of make sure that when you're sitting in that seat and your back is touching the backrest, you have about 2 to 3 inches of space between the back of the knee and the edge of the seat. Next, we have the armrests. So armrest can be a tricky one. What's kind of important to remember, the context to have, is that your armrests aren't really meant to be used all day long. Unless you have some sort of like discomfort or pre-existing condition, or you had a healthcare provider recommend them for some reason. For the general, computer user who doesn't really have that much discomfort, the armrests are really just meant to be used, when you're kind of sitting back in your chair, maybe you're taking a call, you want to rest your arm somewhere. When you are typing and using the mouse, we tend not to recommend to use your armrests all day, because your elbow has some soft tissue there. So specifically, you have that same nerve that's responsible for the pain you feel when you hit your funny bone on something. And if you compress that nerve for prolonged periods, it can cause some discomfort in the forearm and elbow area. So we actually recommend positioning the armrest so that they are slightly below that elbow, but not low enough that you kind of have to reach to the side. So the way that I would recommend kind of finding that correct armrest height is to put your hands in your lap, see where your elbows fall. Where your elbows are when your hands in your lap is pretty close to your recommended seated elbow height. From there, you want to lower or raise your armrest so that they are about a ½ inch to an inch below your elbow, but your forearm can still kind of rest on them comfortably. So that one's a little bit confusing. So just again, to recap, drop your hands in your lap, position the armrests a little bit below that elbow, and that way you won't be hitting your elbow when you're using the armrest, and you also won't have to shrug your shoulders up like this to use them. The next thing is the lumbar support in a chair. So before we even talk about the lumbar support, I do want to call out that in order for you to be able to use your lumbar support, you need to make sure that you're using the backrest. So we don't want to be leaning forward in that seat. Make sure you kind of sit all the way back in your chair and think of it as offloading your body weight into the backrest. Once you have that contact, you want to make sure that your lower back is being supported. So your lower back, so typically like 2 to 3 inches above that belt line, tends to curve inwards. You want to make sure that that backrest follows that curvature in the low back, so it almost feels like something is hugging or cupping that curvature. This lumbar support is going to look different on every chair. Some chairs don't have like an additional or adjustable lumbar support, but maybe the curvature in the backrest already appropriately fits your lower back, and then it's fine. Some chairs will have an adjustable piece on the back. It might look like a little like horizontal pad that moves up and down. You might have some knobs that you might need to rotate. If you have questions about how to find that, you can always look up the chair adjustment guide for your specific chair model. And for some chairs, actually the whole backrest just moves up and down. So whatever adjustment you have, you just want to make sure that your lower back is being supported. And then the last thing is reclining. So this is something that is it's probably opposite to what you've heard throughout the day, throughout your life actually working. But reclining is actually good for you. You've probably been told that you need to be sitting like super upright throughout the day and holding yourself in that position. The issue with that posture is that significant load at your lower back. And two, eventually the muscles holding you up will get tired, and then you'll start to lean forward. Something that can help prevent that is actually, again, using that backrest. And also something that can help you get some movement throughout the day and take off some of the pressure that you feel in your low back is reclining. Because if you think about, that 90-degree angle versus that recline angle, you're actually close if you were standing up or reclining. So recline mechanism looks different for every chair. Again, some chairs like don't really have a backrest lock and you can kind of just move easily through them. Some chairs, you might have to reach underneath the chair, unlock the backrest. And then once that backrest is unlocked, so there will be another adjustment. Sometimes it looks like a knob that you can rotate. Some have switches, but that will allow you to adjust the tension in that backrest. So what that does is it increases or decreases how difficult or easy it is to recline. And you want to make sure that tension is adjusted to support your body weight. So you don't want it to be so low that you feel like you're falling out of your chair, but it shouldn't be so high that you have to push really, really hard to move. It should look something like, if you look at my camera here in between, where I can easily move throughout the day. Okay. All right. The next section would be the work surface height. And someone asked a question about keyboard alignment, and we'll get to that in a moment. But we're first going to talk about the height that your keyboard and mouse should be positioned at. So again, work surfaces just tend to be too high for most people. And what that ends up contributing to is that kind of shoulder shrugging position. So we want to make sure that our shoulders are relaxed throughout the day. And in order for that to happen, the keyboard and mouse need to be positioned slightly below that resting elbow height. So similar to the armrests, you drop your hands in your lap, see where your elbows fall. Your keyboard and mouse should be either at that height or even slightly below. If you're not 6'4" and your keyboard is not matching up to your seated elbow height, there are a couple different ways to achieve that position. One, and the easiest way probably, is to just raise your chair higher and then use a footrest to continue to make sure that your feet are being supported and your thighs are parallel to the ground. If your chair does not adjust high enough for you to accomplish this, there are a couple different ways to kind of get to that position. One could be to use a height adjustable desk and lower the desk. Or you might have to do a combination of both, where you lower the desk and then raise your chair and use the footrest. And you can also use a keyboard tray or drawer that attaches to the underside of the desk to allow you to keep your keyboards kind of your keyboard and mouse a little bit lower than your desk height. And if you're working from home or you're really in an environment that's not permanent and you don't want to kind of make these investments, a couple of different ways to lower that keyboard positioning could be to use a cushion to elevate yourself, right? Sit on a cushion so you can sit a little bit higher, or maybe even use a lap desk that you can put your keyboard on while you're typing. Okay. The next thing would be the distance of the keyboard and mouse. So a tip that I was taught a long time ago, and that I want to share with you guys because it'll really, really help you as you're kind of going on this journey of, not just your own workstation, but kind of implementing these programs for your organization, is that there are really two things that are going to drive your posture when you're working at your desk. It's going to be where your hands are and where your eyes are. So if your screen is too far or too high, we tend to bend our neck up and down. If it's too far, we lean forward. If the keyboard and mouse are too far from our hands, we tend to lean towards them. So in order to be able to sit all the way back in your chair, and again, offload your body weight into that backrest of the chair, you want to make sure that your keyboard and mouse are within kind of the sweeping motion of your arm. So this is called your neutral reach zone. So if you're sitting all the way back and you move your forearm back and forth like a windshield wiper, you want your keyboard and mouse to be within that zone so that you're able to use them, but still sit back. And then for the angle of the keyboard and mouse, the idea is that you want to be able to keep your wrist straight throughout the day. So a lot of people will often use keyboards that are really thick, or maybe they're on an incline like this, or keyboards that have those keyboard tabs or feet or whatever you want to call them elevated. That angle for the keyboard is not recommended because it actually puts a lot of pressure on your carpal tunnel, which is right here where your wrist is. So your carpal tunnel is kind of a small area like this. And when you keep it straight, we're putting a minimal amount of pressure there. When we bend it up throughout the day, we're actually increasing the pressure in that area. and that can cause some discomfort over time. So two things to help reduce that discomfort or avoid developing it would be to flatten the keyboard so you can keep your wrist straight and make sure you're not putting direct pressure on the wrist. Your palm is okay for you to rest your hands on a work surface or even one of those palm supports that you can buy to place in front of the keyboard. But you want to make sure, again, you're keeping the wrist straight and avoiding that direct kind of pressure on the wrist. Your palm is okay. For the keyboard, like kind of the utilization of the mouse is a little bit different. So the same principles really apply, right? What we really want to avoid is the direct contact at the wrist in front of the mouse and that upward angle. But another thing that we tend to do when we use the mouse, and it's just the difference between typing and using a mouse, is we tend to kind of anchor our wrist on a surface. And then when your wrist is anchored to a surface, the only way you're really going to be able to move that mouse is in a pivoting left to right motion like this. And that can cause, again, that some discomfort over time. So while these palm supports are recommended to use in front of the keyboard to reduce that pressure and honestly help straighten out your wrists a little bit, in front of the mouse, they're actually not recommended because they cause that pivoting motion. Alternatively, for mousing, you want to make sure to so right now, if you drop your arm to your side and you bring it back up, you'll notice that your hand is naturally or neutrally in a handshake position. We want to maintain that as much as we can while you're using a mouse. It might be difficult to do this, but just try it out. It's a bit of a learning curve, but if you take your standard mouse and you just kind of put your hand in that handshake position and then slowly just roll your fingers over the mouse, this position straightens out the forearm a little bit, and it straightens out the forearm, the wrist, and it reduces some of that contact stress at the wrist. Again, I know this is a learning curve, so if you have some discomfort in the hand and the wrist, it could be worth testing out an alternative mouse. And you might have seen these like vertical or semi-vertical mice used pretty often now, but the reason that they're beneficial is because they allow you to maintain that neutral position and they take the wrist off of the work surface, so you're no longer putting direct pressure there or pivoting. And then the final key here is if you don't have any, this is the caveat here is if you don't have any kind of discomfort in your arm or shoulder. If you do, we kind of have to make modifications. But if you don't, instead of moving the mouse left to right like this in a pivoting motion, you actually want to try to engage the muscles in your upper arm and move your arm around a little bit more. So you're reducing the repetitive motions in the hand and the wrist. Okay, I'm going to pause here to answer a question about the keyboard alignment with and without a number pad. So this is a very, very good question. Let's go back over here. So most keyboards, the standard keyboard that you would walk into if you were kind of furnishing an office, has the alpha keys on the left side and the number keys on the right side. The issue with that setup is for a lot of users, that keyboard is too wide and it results in you having to reach for the mouse. So just imagine, you're aligned with your keyboard and your mouse is as close as you can get it to the keyboard. What ends up happening is because we use the alpha keys more, we tend to center ourselves with the alpha keys. And then when you're centered with the alpha keys, you end up reaching off to the side with your upper arm, and that can cause some discomfort on the shoulder over time. So without a number pad, like a keyboard with the number keys, it's actually pretty easy to align yourself. You want to make sure that you're aligned with the center of the space bar of your keyboard. And once you're aligned with the center of the space bar of your keyboard, you can easily kind of move your mouse close to the keyboard. If you are using a keyboard, like a standard keyboard with a number pad on the right side, you really need to think about what tasks you're doing throughout the day and how much time you're spending using the alpha keys versus the number pad versus your mouse. So if you are, for the majority of the day, just using the alpha keys, again, you want to center yourself with the space bar of your keyboard and the center of the screen. Then you want to move the mouse as close as you can get it to the keyboard. And if you're having that discomfort, you might have to kind of consider a different keyboard setup. But if you're not, again, just limit the amount of reaching as much as you can. If you tend to use more of like the arrows on the right side, more number keys, or you mouse more than you use the keyboard, it's okay to shift over the keyboard a little bit more to the left and bring your mouse closer. So just think about what tasks you're doing throughout the day, what percentage of the day you're using the keyboard versus the mouse, and make some adjustments as you go. The goal really is to keep your trunk aligned with your keyboard so you're not kind of like twisting to type. And you're also reducing how much you're reaching off to the side. Okay, that was a good question. All right, the next thing I'm going to go over is the monitor positioning. So if we back up for a second, we want to start with the chair, then you move to the keyboard and mouse positioning, and the last thing you're going to adjust is your monitor. So the height of the screen is the first thing to look at, and this is something that most people actually get wrong, and it has to do with the fact that the muscles in our eyes actually shift our gaze downwards by about 10 to 15 degrees. So what that means is if you were to draw a line from your eyes to the screen and they hit the middle of the screen, your gaze is actually going to fall 10 to 15 degrees below that, meaning more towards the bottom, and then you have to bend your neck up to look at the middle of the screen. What we actually want is for you to draw a line from your eyes to the top third, 25%, 30% of the screen. And once you have the monitor position there, your gaze will actually fall somewhere closer to the middle of the screen. So again, you want your eye line to be at the top of the screen so that you're naturally looking down somewhere closer to the middle of the screen. You also want to tilt your monitor slightly away from you. So because of that downwards gaze, if your monitor is fully vertical, like straight up like this, your gaze does not hit at a perpendicular angle. So if you shift your monitor about 10 to 20 degrees away from you like this, your gaze hits at a more perpendicular angle, making it easier to read the text on your screen. And the next thing would be the distance of the monitor. So remember what I said, two things that'll help determine your posture at your workstation. They are going to be where your eyes are and where your hands are. So if your screen is too far, we are going to lean towards it. And so to prevent that from happening, you want to make sure that you have the monitor close enough so you're able to sit all the way back. The general rule of thumb is to have the screen about an arm's length away from you, but you might need to make some adjustments from there because monitor sizes have changed a lot. Some people are working just only off a laptop screen. Some people are working off a 24-inch. Some people are working off a 30-inch screen. There's a lot of variation there. So if your screen is smaller, you're going to want it a little bit closer. If it's bigger, you're going to want it a little bit further so you can still see the whole screen without having to rotate your neck too much. So I would start with an arm's length, and then from there, if that feels too close, just keep moving it back slowly. And you don't want to exceed that point of where you feel like you have to lean forward. So the goal is just to make sure that you're able to sit all the way back. The next tricky thing that we see with monitors is alignment. So if you have a single screen, it's pretty straightforward. Align the center of the screen with the space bar of the keyboard and the center of yourself. If you are using multiple screens, you're going to have to think about how much you use each one. So if you tend to use both screens about the same amount, you want to center yourself with the middle of both of those screens, and then angle them in slightly so that you're decreasing that viewing envelope and you don't have to rotate your neck too much to see the sides of the screen. If you have one primary screen and one secondary, you want to center yourself with the primary, put the secondary one off to the side and angle it slightly inwards as well. And you want to get them as close together as you can. So again, that you're reducing that neck rotation. And if you're using 3 screens, we recommend center yourself with this, your primary, and then the left and the right would be your secondary screens. And just a tip in terms of like where to position the applications on your screen, try to keep them, the ones that you're using the most frequently as close to the center as possible. So if you are using 3 screens and your left and your right screen are taking up a lot of space horizontally on the desk, you still have to rotate your neck significantly to see the applications on those secondary screens. Move in things that you're referencing more often closer to that right side over here, or that closer to that center. So again, you're not really spending a ton of time sitting with your neck in a rotated position. And the one tip I will give here is if you are using your laptop as your primary screen, it's not a big deal, but I've seen a lot of setups where people use their monitor as their primary and their laptop is only open for webcam, and then you end up kind of looking down into the left or the right for prolonged periods. If you don't really care that you're not looking directly into the webcam, just make sure to raise that laptop a little bit higher so you're not having to look down. If you do find yourself in a lot of meetings and having to look down at the laptop webcam, I would recommend using an external webcam and putting it on your primary screen. That'll help correct a lot of the neck alignment issues we see with monitor setups. Question from Julie. Does the second screen matter if you are right or left-handed? So I'm not 100% sure. I'll try to answer that question based off what I think you mean, but feel free to kind of correct me if I didn't answer it correctly. So if you are left or right-handed, that typically just has to do more with where your mouse is positioned. There is some research on which side, if you're left, which side you're more dominant on visually. But I would say for the most part, keep if you're thinking about just discomfort and positioning, try to keep your center screen centered with you. The second screen, if it's on the you have a lot of discomfort on the right side, maybe place it on the left. If you have it on the left side, maybe place it on the right. Question about productivity. Does 3 monitors really help with productivity? So there's mixed kind of evidence there. Not everyone needs it. It really just depends on what your job functions are more than the productivity. I think for most people, 1 or 2 screens are more than enough. But for certain functions, you might have to access a lot of different databases or things or kind of applications at the same time. And then in that case, it would help because you're not having to kind of switch between things often. Really, really just depends. But I would say for most people, 3 screens is not necessary. 1 to 2 can be helpful. So Julie, going back to your question, like I mentioned, there are some considerations for kind of like where your eyes are more dominant, things like that. But I would focus more on the space restrictions you have, how you can easily fit, if you have a small desk or if there's another person's desk on the right side kind of getting in the way, focus more on that alignment and where you're able to sit comfortably first. And then you can think about the dominant side, the left or the right. And also it's always important to think about the discomfort. If you have discomfort on your right side, you probably don't want to rotate in that position for too long. So it might make sense to have your monitor on the left side. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to move on to standing. So this is always a hot topic. And while standing desks do have their benefits, it is a pet peeve of most ergonomists when people kind of assume they're going to fix everything. the big thing with standing desks is that standing isn't movement, it's still a static posture. So while it can give you the opportunity to change your position throughout the day, which is good, standing for too long is still a static posture, and it still has similar kind of risk to sitting does. And that risk is, that prolonged static position. Not only are you still static, but now you're also statically loading your joints. So you tend to put a lot of pressure on your ankles, your knees, your hips, etc. So standing all day, if you have the option to sit down, is not recommended because it can actually maybe make some of that discomfort you're experiencing worse or add to it. The benefit of that sit to stand desk is it gives you an option to keep changing your position throughout the day. So when you are using a sit to stand desk, in terms of timing, it's recommended to switch positions like 1 to 2 times per hour and not exceed about 15 to 20 minutes of standing per hour. So the best hint I can get, or best tip I can give you, is the second you start to kind of feel like you have to shift your weight on your feet, or you're starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable, you can't really like stand up straight anymore, you're like leaning on that work surface, that's your body telling you to sit back down. In terms of posture and positioning, the same guidelines apply for standing desks as they did for sitting. So you want to make sure that your feet are about shoulder width apart, your shoulders are relaxed, hands and wrists in a neutral position, and your neck is straight. And then the important part with that standing desk is that, again, it doesn't really eliminate the need to move throughout the day. So if you want one because you're maybe back to back on calls often and you have a hard time leaving your desk, yes, that sit to stand will help allow you to change your positioning throughout the day, but it doesn't eliminate the need to move. So again, sitting and standing are static postures. Static postures are associated with a lot of negative things. So one is that your muscles need movement to kind of clear out waste and receive nutrients. And you'll start to feel some fatigue in your muscles throughout the day if you don't move a ton. Standing also slows down your metabolism. If you don't move for, I think it's about if you have an hour of uninterrupted sitting or standing, a lot of the enzymes that are responsible for fat reduction can start to decrease in terms of their activity. So it can slow down your metabolism. And, people who sit or kind of engage in static postures for prolonged periods experience higher risks of all-cause mortality and cardiovascular disease, and et cetera. So we want to make sure that you're kind of building in the movement throughout the day. And about every hour, try to incorporate about 4 to 5 minutes of movement. It doesn't have to be 4 to 5 minutes in a row. You can do 2 to 3 minutes at a time. If you sit for 20-ish minutes, you stand for about 8, then you can move around for 2, and it gives you a good cycle. Sometimes those 30-minute kind of periods can be hard to keep doing all day over and over again. So just make sure that at least once an hour you're getting up. You can even get up and move at your desk. You don't necessarily have to go for a walk. Just kind of move around at your desk, maybe grab some water, talk to a neighbor, but get out of those static postures as much as you can. And then for visual breaks, you've probably heard your eye doctor recommend 20-20-20, which is every 20 minutes you want to look about 20 feet away from your screen for about 20 seconds. Our eyes have muscles as well, and they need breaks. So it can often be helpful to incorporate the movement breaks in at the same time as the visual breaks. All right, so we have a question about using standing desks with walking pads for movement. Would this be a good ergonomic practice? Great question. There's a lot to consider there. Ergonomics isn't just about the posture element, it's also about productivity. All of the studies that have kind of shown or kind of tested using a treadmill desk or a stationary bike while you're working show that you do have a decrease in productivity while you're working. And also just, if you're furnishing an office, it's an additional power source that you have to, like an item that needs additional power. It can also kind of cause some safety issues, like someone could fall off the treadmill while they're walking and working, etc. So the best thing I would actually recommend is just kind of get up and take those movement breaks instead of trying to work at the same time, because you will either be too distracted by work to maybe continue walking properly and you could hurt yourself, or your productivity is going to decrease. My desk is non-adjustable standing. I have a chair, but it's horrible. I can't find a good balance of adjustment. Any chair recommendations? That is a good question. So a non-adjustable standing desk is not really recommended because you don't have the option to sit down. So the first thing I would say is if you can find a desk that is lower and not fully stuck in standing, I would recommend using that. If you're not able to replace the desk, you can always purchase a higher chair that has like a foot ring or footstool built into it. So you'll see these offered in like laboratory settings as well, where they can they'll have like a ring built in at the bottom of the chair, so you have somewhere to rest your feet. Okay, I'm, in the interest of time, going to move on to the next section, but if I have more time to get to the rest of these questions, I will. The next thing I briefly want to cover is TuMeke's office ergonomics assessment. So we recently, released our office ergo feature. Previously, we only were assessing material handling environments, but now we have updated our software to also accommodate office settings. And the primary methodology that we use to develop this is called the ROSA assessment, which is Rapid Office Strain Assessment. And the way that this app works, or this office assessment works, is you record someone kind of working at their desk. It'll ask you to take a couple different shots. That video is then kind of analyzed using our AI, which helps understand or helps us kind of understand where you are in relation to your workspace, what is your posture while you're using these work tools, etc. And then you receive some immediate feedback on your positioning and the things that you can do to improve. So the first kind of like point, where the first touch point here would be using the mobile app. And you can see here that you do get some immediate results. So if you wanted to provide someone some guidance then and there, you can use the mobile app for that. If you're interested in more in-depth reporting, we also have on the desktop a way to access that. But here's an example of what you can see on the mobile app. So you can see on the left side, you kind of just take a couple of shots of someone working at their workstation, so their chair, their keyboard and mouse, their monitor, etc. Once that is complete, you'll get a score and some problems or some kind of recommended next steps. So if we find that the height is too low, it'll give you guidance on, where you should have that chair height positioned. So when you're kind of on the go in front of the employee or worker, the mobile app is helpful, or it's a great tool. And then on the back end, we also have some more in-depth reporting. So in our risk suite, you are able to access a full report. And here you can see a score, the number of problems that were highlighted, a way to understand how you can kind of reduce the score to an acceptable level depending on what you address here. And the last thing that you can kind of export from here is a PDF report that highlights all of the recommended changes. So it does streamline that office assessment pretty quickly, pretty significantly more is what I meant to say. But there's a couple components here. Is like, if you're not familiar with doing office assessments, it really does automate and streamline that process. And then the reporting aspect, just coming from experience, reporting can take some time. So, that piece is automated as well. All you really have to do is press a download button and you get all your results. Okay, and if you are a part of managing that program within your organization, if you are coming up with an office ergonomics program, If you're working with your HR team, maybe your health and safety team, or if you're kind of thinking about like, I want to do this, but where do I start? Your kind of your method and the level of or like the methodology here is really just going to depend on your needs and where you are at an organization. It can be reactive, where you're just kind of responding to reports of discomfort and then evaluating workstations, or it can be increasingly more proactive. And a couple ways to kind of sense when an assessment is needed is, the obvious one is if a lot of people are reporting discomfort, or if a specific person is reporting discomfort, evaluating their workstation can help. Some things that might be red flags are if you're walking around your office floor and you're seeing employees kind of supplementing their workstations with a lot of tools that they might have brought in on their own. So one could be, if you're seeing a lot of lumbar support pillows being added to chairs, a lot of wrist rests in front of mice, those types of things can be a signal that there is a misfit between the people working at the desks and the desks. Often some people will start to do assessments with when you're a new hire. So you could have an ergonomics 101 session as a new hire, or you can, have your workstation evaluated before you're the first day that you get there, and make sure it's all set up to go. If you are reassigning workstations, or if you're working in a hot desking environment, kind of teaching everyone how to make adjustments to the new tools that they might have can be really helpful, and can be a proactive way to prevent some discomfort. And then also, if you're redesigning your office, so maybe you're, 2 to 3 years away from an office, and you're at that redesigning an office, and you're at that phase where you need to pick, okay, what desks are we going to have? What chairs are we going to standardize on, et cetera? Doing an ergonomic evaluation of your existing setup. So an ergonomic audit is another way to frame that, can help you identify where you're kind of missing the mark. Like what are the most common issues that we're seeing? Is it the desks are too high? Is it the chairs don't have enough lumbar support? Things like that. And then once you've done that, you have a better idea of the design changes that you need to make. And then once you've made those design changes in the new office, you can kind of teach people how to make adjustments at their workstation, and do the kind of the assessment before and after. Okay, so question is the office evaluation part of TuMeke? So yes, the office assessment is available. If you are an existing customer, please reach out to your customer success manager, and they will kind of guide you through on how you can access that. And if you are not a customer yet, you can either reach out to info@tumeke.io, or go to our website and put in a request for a free trial, and someone from our sales team will help you out. From Greg, can you upload an Office Ergo workstation task using just a camera? So in its current state, so this is V1 of our Office assessment, you have to use the mobile app to do the assessment. And you'll have to take like quick 1-second videos of the chair, keyboard, mouse, and monitor. And when you open that app in the software, it actually kind of walks you through it. So you're not going to pre-record videos. You're actually just going to walk through the workflow and kind of take the video as the software is guiding you. And question about ideal laptop and font size. So that's a hard question to answer. My answer is not going to be a very direct one. All I will say is we all, again, come in different shapes and sizes. Some people wear glasses, some people don't. Our eyes tend to change as we get older. So really what I would recommend there is, if you find yourself leaning forward, that means the screen is either too small, or the text is too small, or it's too far away. So if you're leaning forward, you could try a larger screen, you can try increasing the font, and you can try moving it closer. I would focus less on the size of the screen and more on those factors. Okay. I know we are at time, and I believe I've kind of gone through all the questions. If there's any more, I could stick around for another minute or two, but otherwise it was a pleasure having you all here, even though I couldn't see your faces. And if you have additional questions about the office assessment, again, if you're an existing customer, please reach out to your customer success manager. If you are not, you can reach out to info@tumeke.io or request a free trial on our website. All right. From John, we had the question, are you able to upload videos from your phone into the office assessments? So in its current state, you have to use the mobile app to upload the videos. Like you'll have to take them live using the in-app camera. But we are making changes to the office assessment. So kind of sit tight on those updates and we'll let you know, and we'll kind of communicate when that method of upload is changed. Okay, Vinu, I would just reach out to your customer success manager if you're already an existing user. And I think we had a question about case studies, et cetera. So we do have case studies posted on our website, but if you would like additional information, please feel free to reach out to that info@tumeke.io and we will share the resources that we do have. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining today. Again, my name is Amaanat Gill, and I'm a solutions manager at the company. If you have any additional questions, we can field them through email. Feel free to reach out to info@tumeke.io. But it was a pleasure doing this presentation, and I hope you guys got some good information out of it. Okay.